although we think of Trump as a kind of powerful MAGA man, what he's actually doing is moving the system back towards a more consensus-seeking model, where both sides recognize that because of Trump's peculiarities, difference, uniqueness, there must be some sort of reckoning and movement back to the middle. American politics is best. The American right is best when it's able to engage substantively on questions of policy and ideology with a healthy left, and vice versa. That the idea that a culture war has to be won forgets that the point of a culture war is its continual fighting, its back and forth, which is essential to the functioning of any democracy, not least the United States. It's a delight to be here at Bree's very generous invitation. My son was the Generation Liberty guy at ANU until last year, so I have some notion. I've seen the posters and the core flutes and the banners all piled up in his apartment. That's how I know Generation Liberty, as well as the very good work you do to bring through the next generation of big L liberals. We can argue about some of the labels we might use to describe what I'm going to talk about. So what I will do is, I'm a professor of American politics. I am the most read conservative political scientist in Australia because, in truth, I am the only one. What I'd like to do is talk about American politics, and particularly conservative prospects after Trump. And inevitably, though I'm not going to lever it in, we'll end up reflecting, I think, on how far what's happening in America offers any sort of viable template for what's happening to the right or not happening to the right here. And I'm very happy to see an arm raised and to go to it. But I will build in a brief exercise while I'll ask you to evaluate conservative prospects, pros and cons. So what would I like to say? Well, I think let me give you the negative or the pessimistic case first. And then I want to get to the optimistic case. The pessimistic case is that we've got a president who is remarkable in lots of ways, but comes with some significant problems for conservatives. Certainly conservatives in their 20s and 30s looking to be in power in their 40s and 50s, which, let me suggest, is you guys and your peers across the Pacific. Trump is a problem for a couple of reasons. First of all, he has shown a disinterest in institutions. He's attacked institutions, I give you that, from the universities to the media, even to Congress and to US aid, which doesn't exist. So he has an institutional sense, but he's an institution destroyer, not an institution builder. And let me suggest, as we can argue about what conservatism means, I think conservatism has to, at some fundamental level, embrace the civilizational, organizational role of institutions. Democratically sanctioned, if not actually elected, institutions. And he has no interest in that. He has no interest in Congress. Didn't work for him in the first term, couldn't get stuff through. His one achievement, the big, beautiful bill, is the exception that proves the rule. This is a guy that's not interested in institutional transformation. The great presidents of history, like, well, you start with the great institution builder at the very beginning was George Washington, who creates the nation itself. Abraham Lincoln saves the nation. But the big ones of the 20th century were Democrats. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and his New Deal. The legacy, mostly negative, of that 1930s, 1940s institutional transformation is still something that American politics and the right in America is still trying to deal with. Why is it still trying to deal with it? Because he built institutions. He changed the nature of the government, both in size and, depending on where you sit on the argument, the quality or depth of engagement with the ordinary citizen. This was replicated, at least had echoes, in LBJ's 1960s Great Society push. Again, the intention here was not simply to change the style or tone or mood of the politics, but to alter fundamentally its institutions. Welfarism, civil rights, these were all given lasting, powerful institutional expression. And the right, given those two movements, has always struggled to match. When their revolutions present themselves, and I'd suggest Reagan and Trump are revolutionaries, they always struggle against the rocks of democratic deep institutionalism. And Trump, even in a second term, has no appetite for taking that on. He talks about the deep state, he gives it a good kicking, but not much more than that. He's not really that interested, even though there are intellectuals around him, like J.D. Vance, and at more remove, a guy called Christopher Rufo, who think the way to seize back control of the culture is to march back through the institutions. I don't think Trump has really much. He's not trying to develop a right-wing academic class to supplant a left-wing academic class. He has no real. He sees woke universities as a target to beat. And my suspicion is those universities and other centers of a left-wing cultural power will simply wait him out. The same way they waited out Reagan, one of the most successful presidents in American history, a guy who gives us victory in the Cold War. The left knew they couldn't win the economic argument thereafter. They infiltrated the culture. That makes it sound very conspiratorial. They took power in the wider culture. Not specifically American phenomena, though peculiar, mostly it's replicated here, and we live with the consequences of it every day. Trump is not the solution to that. That poses a problem for conservatism. Second problem is Trump himself. I've been failing to predict this guy for 10 years. He's the most consequential president of our lifetimes, and of mine, and mine's longer than yours. I didn't see him coming. When I'd go to the United States, I've tried to change this. This is why I spent time in Wyoming recently. I'd go to campuses, which are all left-wing. I'd go to a think tank, American Enterprise Institute, Heritage, which is in Freefall, Hudson. And again, you get an interesting take on where things are at, but you don't get that visceral sense of Trump's appeal. You've got to go to disaffected auto workers. Coal miners have been told they're responsible for the climate catastrophe. Yeah, the deplorables. You've got to go somewhere else, and academics like me just weren't doing that through the early 2000s. So Trump came almost from nowhere until you examine some of the sociological evidence for his rise. Now, why is Trump a problem here? Because Trump seems a peculiar, unique figure in his capacity to channel this wider cultural alienation. There is no obvious successor able to do this. Conservatives used to be pretty good at lines of succession, lineage. Barry Goldwater, 1964, wiped out in that election by LBJ. But Ronald Reagan read his book, The Conscience of a Conservative, and 16 years later wins, to that point, the most decisive Republican victory in US history. See, that's not true, because Nixon wins a bigger one, but one of the largest. I think it's the second largest. And you trace Reaganism from Goldwaterism. Where does Trump come from? What books has he read? Which philosophers does he defer to? Somebody said to him, you're very like Edmund Burke in your approach, Mr. President. And he said, well, can we call him up, have him come visit? Trump is unanchored. It doesn't mean he's an idiot, I think far from it, but he doesn't have that notion of his place in a philosophical tradition or lineage. This is a problem, again, for conservatives, because there's no obvious guy or gal that's going to replace him. We're destined to have not a Trump mini-me, but an inferior version of Donald. And he likes it that way. And he makes his children squabble for succession. He's making people like Vance and Rubio struggle for that succession without ever anointing any of them, because he knows none of them are going to match up. None of them are going to have remarkable charisma and moment in history that he's enjoyed. Again, let me suggest this is a problem for conservatives. He's, of course, unlike a Reagan or a Bush or a Nixon, he doesn't owe anybody anything. Most of these other guys, their power comes from a family connection in the case of Bush and great wealth. With Trump, it was very hard for the Republicans to control him because he didn't have favors to return. He came not from nowhere. No one comes from nowhere. But he came independent of lines of patronage, which gave him huge maneuverability and power within the Republican movement. And that's not going to be easy to replicate. Even if his son were to follow him, which I don't think is a tenable proposition, he's a very pale imitation of Trump himself. It doesn't give us the uniqueness that is Donald Trump. And again, let me suggest that as a problem for wider conservatism. Another downer. He has no, and I'll get to the optimism in a moment, foreign policy. He has no interest in building a global conservative movement. I mean, he disdains, I think. I mean, he might say he likes Georgia Maloney, but I don't think, or Tachiki, if I'm saying that wrong, the new Japanese prime minister. These are, under any other Republican administration, these would be natural allies. Think of Reagan, Thatcher. These two characters, who I thought would never die when I was your age, they were permanent fixtures in my whole intellectual scheme. This is the pairing that wins the Cold War, stands solid against global communism. Trump has shown no interest in building anything like a similar dynamic. He doesn't care about foreigners. Foreigners are to be distrusted, whether they're right or left. This is a problem for conservatism. If you want to build a world premised on the virtues of conservative nationalism, and there are lots of virtues to that understanding of how diplomacy should work, you need a leader prepared to lead on conservative nationalism, and Trump doesn't do that, has no interest in doing that. He's happy to cut deals. He's flattered by Putin and by Xi Jinping. He sees the world as one big real estate pie to be carved up. I mean, these are exaggerations, but only a little. So at home, no institutions. Abroad, no alliances that could help craft something more lasting and more universal. So what's the case for optimism? Why shouldn't we all just leave feeling gloomy? Because I think what he's done is, like any revolutionary, conservatives don't do revolutionaries, but I think he's earned that title. He's thrown so much up in the air that it can't all land back in a worse place. That he's made it. I mean, 5 years ago, when you were the public health tyranny was locking you in your bedroom during your high school years. The notion now that you would have a lively, transgressive form of conservatism, given the penetration, the negation of personal freedoms that much of the left across the West indulged in that COVID period, the idea that you'd get a Donald Trump as some sort of solution would have seemed a second coming of Donald Trump, would have seemed fantastical. What he's done is re-establish a conservative vocabulary, which doesn't have to play ball with left-wing concepts. He's reorganized, I think, the understanding of race and gender in the US, and as a consequence has caused us to rethink the dominion that the left have in these particular areas. And some evidence for this would be, you know, the famous campaign commercial, Kamala Harris is for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. I don't know of a more effective campaign slogan anywhere in the United States, if not anywhere in the West. That one ad, backed up by an executive order which restored 2 genders to American public life, have been extraordinary feats of reaction, of pushing back. And the reward, let me suggest, has been the beginning, because he started this in 2016, evidence of it when he lost in 2020, certainly true in 2024, the evidence of a multiracial, multi-ethnic Republican coalition. He wants black and brown people and some of the innate conservative traditionalism that underpins those demographics on the Republican side. And he knew, I think instinctively, as that campaign ad demonstrates, that the coddling and infantilization of black and brown people by white leftists was a losing electoral strategy for them. This is a good thing. This is a good thing. He's made, and it gives the Democrats the shits, to use the technical term. If they can't rely on the inbuilt constituencies of non-white Americans, voters of color, they have to become much more, they have to transform themselves. Let me suggest, but as an aside, one of the points of optimism that I'm hoping for, that I'm hoping to indulge more fully, is that Trump presages a reformation of the left. The left know they cannot run using identity politics and hating Trump as a winning long-term strategy. My hope is that Trump will convince them that they will have to come back to the center if they want to win political power. I think all great leaders, one of their most important effects is to change the nature of their opponents. Democrats have been highly resistant to this because they want to be changed by Trump. The consequence has been a second Trump term. So he's building a multi-ethnic coalition. Here the action most obviously is amongst Latino Americans. A guy called Mitt Romney. Do you remember Mitt Romney? In 2012, got 27% of the Hispanic vote. Donald Trump in 2024 got 44% of that vote. He turned a vote share in the low 30s of male Latino voters into a 53% winning margin. He is evidence that, I mean, he defies the caricature, I think, that he simply appeals to gammons, angry white, lower middle class Americans. His appeal is multiracial, and it's one of his most subversive appeals. And I think it promises a much more vital form of conservatism, of republicanism. We can argue about if there's a difference in 25, 50 years' time, when he's able to use the social conservatism, the religiosity of many of these groups to enhance the electoral prospects of the Republican Party. How long have I gone now? 20 minutes. So give me another 5, perhaps. I think... So he's changed the vocabulary, and I think vocabulary counts. Doesn't mean that every campus is suddenly a home to conservatives, but there is now, you tell me if it computes with your experience, there's now greater space for contrary positions to be taken. Does that follow from the age of Trump? Not directly. Has he established an environment in which this is possible? Yes, I think that's absolutely true. the final reason to be optimistic, and it comes down to Trump's character himself, rather than see him as the problem, that once you remove this remarkable character, the whole movement collapses, what he's actually been able to do is actually foster a degree of self-reflection on the right of US politics. And there is now, we can say, well, this is fracturing. This is the whole thing breaking apart. There is now a very vital internal struggle between different factions of the conservative stroke Republican movement, from MAGA to Christian nationalists to neoconservatives and several others. American politics is at its best when it can build on, it can countenance debate and build consensus. One of the most incisive writers in America today, a guy called Yuval Levin, can't be more effusive. I can't encourage you enough to go and read his stuff. The strength of American politics, not just of the American right, is this ability to prosper on the basis of consensus. So this is my closing thought here. Although we think of Trump as a kind of powerful MAGA man, what he's actually doing is moving the system back towards a more consensus-seeking model, where both sides recognize that because of Trump's peculiarities, difference, uniqueness, there must be some sort of reckoning and movement back to the middle. Now, this is going to be me sounding like a woolly liberal, and that's not my intention. American politics is best. The American right is best when it's able to engage substantively on questions of policy and ideology with a healthy left, and vice versa. That the idea that a culture war has to be won forgets that the point of a culture war is its continual fighting. It's back and forth, which is essential to the functioning of any democracy, not least the United States. That's why I'm optimistic about what comes next without being certain. Okay, so my last, good question, and you can go to lunch then, having all agreed that I was right. I'm a university professor, done pretty well. I tend to stay in this job until my super is large enough for me to leave it. That's everyone's ambition, isn't it? But I think one of the positive signs, and you can tell me whether it computes with you. I've been at universities longer, but that doesn't guarantee I've got a more accurate picture of this. That there is now a greater capacity for debate on our campuses, not as much as it needs to be, but it's growing. And that rather ironically, we can tie this to Trump if you want, I think I would, what we've got now is an orthodoxy which is so profound, it's not bringing through champions on the left. So your average 20-year-old is going to be patted on the head, told it's great she goes to climate rallies. You go, girl. Not challenged, made to affirm these orthodox positions. Whereas if you're on the right, and this is where I'll ask this rhetorically, but I'm interested in your reaction. If you're on the right, you've got to learn how to duck and weave. You've got to know which hills you're going to die on and which ones not to die on. Not dying is important. You will learn how to debate. You will learn social skills, political skills, because you're facing an orthodoxy. So rather ironically, this seizure, this cultural seizure, which we're living through now, of kind of left progressivism in our cultural institutions, and this is me at my most optimistic, is actually preparing, despite itself, a new generation of conservative leaders who are better skilled and better equipped because they've had to survive and prosper in a system which says they are heretics. You've been great. Thank you for your time, sitting there patiently, saying such clever, interesting things, which at my age, I don't often leave a room thinking differently about something than when I came in. But there are a couple of interventions here which have caused me to think just a little bit differently. Thank you. It's been a great honor.